Hello girls and boys, Stephen here from the Gold Coast Art School, and today we're going to be discussing first of a series, a little mini series of oils compared to acrylics. We mainly teach oils at the Gold Coast Art School, but then a lot of our students move into acrylics because it suits them better. There are disadvantages and advantages in both. The one we're going to be discussing today is the drying quality, the tonal difference when the paint actually dries. And I'm going to do a little demo. I'm just going to mix up two lots of, one with acrylic, one with oils, mix them up, slap them on these little things there, and then we're going to wait for them to dry. So if you ever wanted a video about watching paint dry, it's as interesting as that. Now you'll notice I'm mixing them separately. Why is this so? The reason is that acrylics dry quickly, and so it's always a good idea not to work with an open palette with acrylics. I like to work with a little bucket, and if I'm called away, I can just stick a lid on it, or I can just use a little micro mister and keep the moisture up because it dries quickly. Oils, on the other hand, that's going to be around for a very long time before it dries. In fact, probably touch dry in 3 days to a week. That's dry enough to be able to paint back over it. And then you've got to worry about, is the underneath going to be strong enough, or is it to support the top, or is it going to split the top coat? I'm going to start mixing these. I'm going to use a knife on the open because there's no way this oil's going to mix up. If you're mixing a knife with small quantities of acrylic, it tends to whip it up and dries it out much more quickly. I like to use a brush, lots of little fingers, and so we'll just start the process. So here we go. I'm going to do my best to mix up exactly the right tone of blue, which is sort of like a mid-blue, maybe slightly lighter than mid-blue, maybe a sky blue. And I'm going to mix up both of them and try and get them to exactly the same colour. You'll notice that I'm using artist quality paint here. These are both are really good quality. Matisse is great quality. It's Flow, keeps a bit wetter. This is a Joe Sonia, great brand, but Joe Sonia has already pre-mixed it it's got a little bit of white already in it. You can see they're not quite the same. But by the time I finish mixing, we'll see what we come up with, because I want it to be the same density. Sometimes pigments vary. Mostly they're the same. You might find there's a slight variance. You can see that's quite rich and dark. Now you can see compared to that, we've got a way to go with the oil. So I can just chuck a bit in there and get the oils, whip that up to a light fluffy texture. The reason we prefer to teach in oils with the Gold Coast Art School is because the advantage of oils is that the colour that you mix up, that is what we call the wet value of the colour, you come back in a week's time and it is still that colour, although the paint has dried. When we're studying and the practical side of colour mixing, it's quite complicated. We take students through the mixing up all the different variants of the colours that they have. It's complicated enough without having to worry about the fact that they've got to factor in that it's going to drop a couple of, maybe a tone, sometimes a tone and a half, maybe a quarter tone, because of the intensity of the pigments. Now I'm just going to paint these. I'm going to use separate brushes, of course, because acrylics and oils do not mix. Having said that, this white gesso ground is actually an acrylic mix. Oils go very well over acrylic, but acrylics do not go well over oils. Reason is that the oils take forever to dry, and what's of some advantage for when you're actually working, it's nice to have a slow drying medium. With acrylics you can buy all manner of additives to slow down the drying time. A bit of a sloppier mix this. The reason being is that I'm using a variety of titanium white. They're both titanium whites, but this one's it's called Flow, and it's for doing wet mix work. It also stays a little bit, doesn't rush off and become super dry in a hurry. So that's kind of some use. It's also good for when you're doing fine work. I'm going to put a little bit more white back in this and see if I can't. They've got to be the same for the purposes of this exercise. It doesn't need much more white in it, but I can see, and Jess can see, that it needs a little bit. So I'm just going to add tiny bit more white in this, in the interests of truth and clarity. See what I was saying before about, they're both phthalocyanine blue, but you can see that this one has a slightly redder edge than that. That's slightly greener, isn't it? Okay, folks, we'll be back when the acrylics dried. This is the drying music. Welcome back. Now, I've got a confession to make. Not only have I changed my jumper to make it look like we're back in a week's time, we're not. Can you see the difference in tone? This one is markedly darker. Only by a tiny bit, but it's enough to throw you out, particularly if you're doing delicate work like perhaps portraiture or something like that, where tone is very, very, very important. If you're doing more broad abstract work, it may not worry you at all, but they really do dry a different tone, and that's because the binder medium that's in acrylic paint is a milky substance like woodwork glue, and when it dries clear. So obviously when you're mixing them up, that whiteness that's in the medium, and it's in all these tubes of paint, that's what holds it together. While it's wet, it's milky. Therefore it affects the colour that when you're mixing. So if you want to do a bright blue sky, that's way too dark for a bright blue sky, although it looked the right colour. The thing is, what you must learn to do, what students need to learn to do, is to add white as they go, because if it's looking too pale, it's probably going to dry the right colour. On the other hand, the stuff that's inside the oil paint, that's held together with an oil. Now, oils vary depending on what you're using. Generally, they are a warmer tone and they hold that colour forever and ever and ever. So they don't actually drop in tone, they remain constant. Same reason why the drying time, I've had to put this brush in water, and this can stay out for 3 days without becoming too much of a problem. Shouldn't do that, should clean it straight away, and I will. You will? So that's that little bit of key difference, one of the differences between oils and acrylics. And it's not that one's better than the other, it's just that one might suit you a little better. As I say, the school, we like that slow drying time because students are here for a day, they come back in a week, it's dry enough to work on. Thank you for watching.